Hey guys, I'm Joe and I'm back with another video for you guys. Something that I've been wanting to do for a while, and it's going to be somewhat of a different video, or at least I'm attempting to make it a different video. With Terminator Dark Fate coming up soon, yet another Terminator movie, I thought it would be none other than a better time to talk about first two Terminator films, all together in one video, like a double feature review. It's something I've been wanting to try out, so we'll see how this goes. And before you ask, are you going to talk about the other Terminator films that come after that? Eventually, yeah. But right now, I don't have the energy for it. And I think since Dark Fate is a direct sequel to these two films, it's probably better at the moment for me to talk about these two films. So let's talk about The Terminator and Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Sci-fi classics that to this day people still list among their all-time favorite films in sci-fi and film in general. And let's get the obvious elephant out of the room here, Joe. Why are you wearing a football jersey? Well, I don't have any Terminator shirts because it's not up there on my top 5 favorites, but I like the first two though. And at the time of this recording, there's an Eagles game on tonight. We're playing the Cowboys, so gotta get into team spirits. And I'm someone who could wear a Spider-Man shirt while doing a review of the movie 50-50. That's just the person I am. I digress. So Terminator 1 and 2. My experience watching these first two films over the years, my parents were in some ways very trusting with me as a child. The first Terminator film would for some reason be on Cinemax late at night on TV. And I always thought it was kind of cool to see in like an R-rated movie, some movies that I wasn't necessarily allowed to watch on a regular basis on my own. It would be late at night on a school night and my parents would say, okay, fine, you can watch Terminator, but we're gonna watch it with you because some of the scenes in here aren't exactly kid-friendly. And I remember being quite mesmerized by the movie. And I unfortunately had this problem as a kid with other movies in general. I would reenact the scenes as I would watch them on TV, almost to the point, well, actually to the point where I got in trouble with my parents and accidentally scared my sister by acting like a Terminator. I was a kid and apparently not a very bright one. And it's a set of films that I think is like really fascinating once you really stop to think about it. It has a lot of themes that, yeah, we've all heard it before, like man versus machine, learning about human emotions and the best of humanity and all that stuff, something that we've seen a million times before. But I think Terminator 2, more so than Terminator 1, Terminator 1's a little more subtle. Terminator 2 is more explicit in its themes, talking about the human condition and ultimately at the end of the day, why mankind is worth saving. You guys know what the plot of these movies are. Now, as it goes in the Terminator lore, on August 29th, 1997, an artificial intelligence created by the US government becomes self-aware and launches a nuclear holocaust in the world, killing 3 billion people. And it ended up being called Judgment Day by the survivors of the nuclear blast. Only after that, they had to face a war against the machines that Skynet set out in order to eliminate the remaining human resistance. And eventually, the human resistance would find a leader, John Connor, that would lead them to ultimate victory. And in a last-ditch effort, Skynet sends a Terminator back through time to the year 1984 to kill John Connor's mother, Sarah Connor, before John Connor's even born. But then, as they show in Terminator 2, the machines had a failsafe. Not only did they send a Terminator back in time to 1984, they send a Terminator to the 90s to kill a young John Connor when he's still a child, just in case the first Terminator failed in its mission. As Jack Bauer says in the show 24, the first rule of engagement is that you have a contingency plan. So in response, John Connor sends 2 lone warriors back into those 2 time periods. To go after the first Terminator, John Connor sends one of his soldiers, Kyle Reese, back in time to protect his mother, Sarah. To go after the second one, he sends back a reprogrammed T-800 Terminator to protect his younger self as a child. James Cameron, I think, is a really great filmmaker, and personally, he's one of my all-time favorites. I mean, some of his movies might not be good as others, like Avatar, even though visually it's amazing to look at. He has a really interesting style. He has a sense of visceral grittiness to his films. One common thing that you tend to see in his films is that he always puts strong female protagonists in his films, right next to the main protagonist. Ripley in Aliens, Zoe Saldana's character in Avatar, I can't remember the character's name, Jamie Lee Curtis in True Lies, Rose in Titanic, and Sarah Connor in Terminator. Well, the second Terminator at least. But he's also a guy that can recreate some really impressive visual shots, whether it's practical effects, mostly if not all CGI, or he could also blend practical and CGI effects together. But the action scenes in Terminator 1 and 2 especially, they're filmed in a way where you can tell what's going on. He doesn't use any kind of shaky cam to cover up bad stunt work. He has a really good way of making the action feel grounded, which I suppose is the best way to start off this video. The action, mostly in the second one, is very impressive. In the first one, it's definitely there and it's really exciting, but the action is definitely improved in the second film. The first film is a very contained type of story. It's very simple, it's tight, and the way it's filmed feels very independent film-like, kind of like the first Die Hard in that respect. The action is competently constructed, and probably my favorite action scene, if you will, is the tech noir scene. She's sitting in the club, all these people are dancing to this 80s pop song. The Terminator comes in looking for her, Kyle Reese is off at a bar watching her closely, and then the Terminator sees Sarah sitting at the table and he walks over, pulls out his gun ready to kill. That moment and another scene where she's trapped under a dead body and the Terminator moves in ready for the kill. That same music and sound effect ramps up again. Oh my god, he's gonna kill her. But then Kyle Reese, just at the very last second, comes in and saves the day. And on top of that, you got a very visceral shootout scene in a police station where the T-800 storms into the building looking for Sarah, going on a killing spree, killing 17 police officers. Other than that though, there's not really that much impressive action sequences, but for the most part, it's entertaining and exciting. Terminator 2, on the other hand, that's where things really get amped up to 11. For starters, the T-1000 chasing John Connor on his bike while he's driving the semi-tow truck, that is probably the best, if not one of the best action sequences ever put to film. And since I mentioned tension earlier with the first Terminator, it's definitely echoed and paralleled in the second film when the T-1000 and T-800 are looking for John Connor. When you first see Robert Patrick as the T-1000, when he knocks out a police officer unconscious supposedly, if you don't know for sure how it's gonna go down, you're probably thinking, is he the one supposed to protect John? It's not really clear up until the hallway standoff, when they both corner John in the middle of the hallway, and John sees the T-800 walking towards him and that look on his face, which he's probably thinking, oh my god, I think that's the Terminator that Mom told me about. And then Arnold says,
"Get down."
Any at all doubts about Arnold's alliances are now gone. And the hand-to-hand combat scenes between the T-800 and T-1000 are really exciting, because in the first one, Kyle Reese is a normal human being, and he can't exactly square off against the T-800. This one, they can actually throw each other into walls, and you don't feel like one guy's gonna get squashed instantaneously when they start fighting. And as for the rest of the action sequences, you have the T-1000 flying in a helicopter chasing the three in the SWAT van, the T-800 firing a minigun onto the police cars down in the parking lot below, being very careful not to hit any human being on the ground. Not only that, but from a visual and special effects standpoint, these two movies for the most part are very good. There's a couple effects in the first film, like when Arnold gouges his eye out, which is just cringe-inducing. Then he looks in the mirror revealing the red eye underneath his skin. You look really closely at that, it's pretty obvious that's like a puppet or an animatronic of some kind. And then the next shot when he's looking at himself in the mirror and fixes his hair, you could tell that it's a real person. And eventually when the T-800's endoskeleton is revealed, it's pretty obvious that it's a stop motion effect. It's not horrible, but it does make it look slightly, just slightly dated. But for the most part, the special effects do hold up in that film at least. The second one uses practical effects and CGI effects. Since the T-1000 is a liquid metal Terminator, he almost looks like he comes out of a Capri Sun commercial from the 90s. He could slip through a jail cell-like door. He could turn into a giant puddle of liquid. There's very few CGI shots that are used in the movie, but when it's done, it looks seamless. Even for 1991, I legitimately do not know how they were able to do that. And the Terminator design itself, the endoskeleton, to say that it's iconic is probably an understatement, but it really is. The design is intimidating, it's scary, especially when you see it seeping through the burning flames in the opening sequence of Terminator 2. Now, the Terminator effects were created none other by Stan Winston, who also was in charge of the animatronics and puppets for the dinosaurs used in the Jurassic Park films. That guy and his crew who created these things, geniuses. And while it's really easy to look at the Terminator films as big giant action films and nothing else, when you really get down to it, the human characters themselves are a lot deeper. More so in the second one, but the first one, they are deep enough to where you can actually get behind Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese. We might as well start with the big guy, the T-800, the Terminator. This is Schwarzenegger's signature role. There's other characters that he's played over the years, obviously, but this is the role that definitely solidified his public image, and ever since then, people will always refer to him as the Terminator. You could talk about Predator, you could talk about Last Action Hero or Eraser, but in reality, he will always be the Terminator. Now, a lot has been said about his acting abilities over the years. It's really easy to mock him, and his line delivery is, you can't not quote his lines. But as the Terminator, I think he's perfect. I think he does a great job. The first film, I didn't really notice it until I watched it the other night. He doesn't really have that many lines, and he's not in there for a lot of scenes in the movie, but when he's there, he makes an impression. He's scary, and as Kyle Reese tells Sarah, he will never ever stop until he accomplishes his mission. And in Terminator 2, I think it's even better. I actually prefer him as the hero as opposed to the villain. He does a good job in a villainous role. Him being a reprogrammed Terminator to protect John Connor, it allows him and Edward Furlong, who plays John Connor, to have a good sense of emotional weight to the movie, outside of Linda Hamilton's character, Sarah Connor. It's an unlikely father-son type of bond that forms between the T-800 and John Connor. Since John Connor never met his real father, Kyle Reese, who died protecting Sarah from the first Terminator, has experienced a lot of would-be fathers that have come and gone in and out of his life over the years. And when he has this Terminator that's supposed to protect him, as Sarah Connor says in this one scene as she's watching the two bond with each other,
it would always be there, and it would die to protect him.
On concept, you might think like that's a stupid idea, a robot being a dad? Really? But for some reason, the way it's executed, I think it's quite amazing. And you gotta love his line delivery too. And there's so many iconic lines that Arnold has as the Terminator. Like I said with his line delivery, you can't not quote any of this stuff, such as,
"I'll be back.
and also this.
Hasta la vista, baby."
Staple film moment that will live on for eternity. And Arnold definitely throws in some of his quirks in his interactions with John Connor. "I'll take care of the police." "Hey, wait, you swore!" "Trust me." Or like when he first picks up the minigun and he gets this smirk on his face. "Yeah, that's definitely you." If someone comes up with you an attitude, you say, "Eat me," or you could do combinations.
Chill out, dickwad.
And as far as the other characters are concerned, you got Sarah Connor, played by Linda Hamilton, who I think one of the best female protagonists in film. And when you meet her in the first Terminator, she's like this really shy young waitress, rocking a really interesting 80s style haircut. And then in Terminator 2, after experiencing all the stuff that happened in the first Terminator, being burdened with knowledge that the human race is going to be incinerated, she takes a complete 180 turn to the Sarah Connor that we know now. As I was watching this movie, I mean this in a good way, she is certifiable. She is insane. As it's explained by Dr. Silverman, the psychologist that we meet in the first one, repeated escape attempts, stabs him in the kneecap with his pen, and at one point she breaks his arm with a baton and nearly chokes him to death. Since Kyle Reese burdened her with knowledge that the human race is going to be incinerated, she knows what's coming, so she let that slip to a few people, and now people think that she's crazy. And her own son, at one point, believes that she's crazy until he meets the Terminator and realizes that she was telling the truth all along.
She knew. And nobody believed her. Not even me.
And you also have Kyle Reese, played by Michael Biehn in the first film. And he shows up in the second one, well, at least in the extended edition of Terminator 2. Michael Biehn, I think he did an amazing job as Kyle Reese. He's gruff, he's battle-hardened, but he's a normal, everyday kind of guy. And physically, he's frail, but at the same time a bit physically fit, considering that he's a soldier serving under John Connor. When he first shows up in 1984 and he evades the police, he's had years of experience and he's utilizing it in a world that's the complete opposite of what he's grown used to. Seeing him tie his shotgun to his wrist and hiding it under his trench coat, forming pipe grenades with mothballs and ammonia, teaching Sarah Connor how to do that stuff. This guy, kind of like Joel and Ellie in The Last of Us, is very efficient at survival. Then there's also the visions that we see of the future when we see the humans fighting the machines, like the dream sequences that Kyle has, and then when Sarah Connor has a dream of Kyle Reese going into his underground base and then a Terminator shows up shooting the whole place up. Seeing the machines scrounging throughout the remains of LA, looking for human survivors. And it's only shown in glimpses. We never see the full picture in these two films. It gives you a taste, but it doesn't give you the full meal. And Kyle Reese's explanation of this to Sarah Connor, it's the right way to use exposition. But Kyle Reese isn't just a soldier that's meant to protect Sarah. He's actually a lot more important to the plot because towards the end of the first film, he expresses his feelings towards Sarah Connor. Hearing all the stories about her raising her son to be a fighter, she reciprocates his feelings and, well, as you know, they make love to each other, which that scene is quite dramatic actually, and a little bit out of place with the rest of the movie tone-wise, but essentially what happens is that John Connor's actually conceived, and Kyle Reese is the biological father. And a thing that runs throughout this movie is like not only the human condition where John teaches the machine how to use certain emotions and certain phrases, but also another thing that runs deep throughout these two films is the idea of changing the future and not doing what you're meant to do. Sarah says to Kyle Reese, "Do I look like the mother of the future? I can't even balance my checkbook. I didn't ask for this. I don't want it." And it carries over into the second film when she's taught about Miles Dyson, played by Joe Morton. I think that's the actor's name if I'm not mistaken. A guy who's in charge of Cyberdyne Systems Corporation, where he finds the remains of the first T-800 and uses that to create an artificial intelligence. And therefore, Skynet's created and the war against the machines happens. So basically, this guy's responsible for what happens. And Sarah, after having a dream sequence, she decides to go find this guy and kill him. Because in her mind, she's thinking that if I kill him, then the robots don't take over. She becomes a Terminator. She sets out to kill somebody to change the future. She's not a machine, but she's on a quest to change the future. She goes in for the kill, but seeing him lying on the ground wounded and his family right next to him, she can't bring herself to do it, realizing that she's no better than the Terminator that came to kill her. So Miles, along with Sarah, the T-800, and John's help, they go to Cyberdyne Systems and wire the place to explode and blow the whole place up. So that way, the research can't go on, and therefore the robots never take over. And I just realized I never mentioned John Connor, played by Edward Furlong. You guys might know him from another movie like American History X, and he also, I believe, showed up at CSI at one point. Kid actors I'm usually iffy on. This is one of the few times where I'm okay with him, because Edward Furlong, I think, actually, you could complain about the way his voice sounds since he was going through puberty. He actually provides a lot of heart to this movie, like teaching the Terminator how to say certain things like "Hasta la vista, baby," or how to do a high five, or teaching him about crying and human emotions and whatnot, or teaching him how to smile as they show in the extended edition of Terminator 2. And certain moments that he shares with the Terminator, explaining the environment he grew up in and placed into a different world where all the other kids were into Nintendo. But as I said earlier, his relationship with the T-800, viewing him as a father figure of some kind, provides that needed emotional weight that plays into the finale of Terminator 2, which virtually every time I watch it, I cry, and I still did. When he realizes that the Terminator is about to destroy himself when he says,
I order you not to go. I order you not to go. I order you not to go.
and if I'm not mistaken, I think a lot of guys have cried from that scene, if not once in their lifetime when they watch this. And I would imagine a few women who at least give this movie a try, they probably feel the same way. And I just realized I never mentioned the T-1000, but Robert Patrick as the T-1000, one of the most scariest bad guys you've ever seen in a movie like this. Obviously a T-1000 more advanced than a T-800, form his arms and legs into knives and stabbing weapons, and can take the form of anybody that he comes into physical contact with. Which in that respect I think is a lot more scarier than being shot. And again, like Arnold in the first film, he doesn't really have that many scenes, but when he's there, he definitely makes an impression. For the time, in 1991, it was very revolutionary. Now we've seen that T-1000 character redone in certain forms in the other Terminator films, but at the time, like I said, it hadn't been done before. And the death of the T-1000 when he falls into the steel, forming into all the people that he turned into, and that last part where it's like a I always kind of felt like that part was like, is this what it's like to be on drugs? Probably in some fashion. And I mentioned the extended edition earlier. Now, you're probably wondering, which one do I prefer? I do prefer the theatrical cut overall, but the extended edition, at least, it has some extra scenes that I do think add a lot more layers to the film, such as the dream sequence where Sarah sees Kyle showing up in her prison cell saying, "Where's our son? He's the target. He's all alone. You gotta protect him." Or like the scene where we see Miles bonding with his wife, and his wife says, "Your heart and your mind are in here, but it doesn't love you like we do." And despite him causing eventually the apocalypse, it does make him likable. It doesn't portray him as some kind of a monster with an evil intention. But there's little extra scenes in there that I don't really think need to be in there, like seeing the T-1000 getting into a cop car after the tow truck explodes, or him stabbing the poor dog to death. I don't need to see that. That just, no. I'm a dog person, so that's why. And then there's obviously the, see there? That's a smile. It's a little cheesy in some respects, but it's a bit of a humorous scene. As far as the ending is concerned, it's very ambiguous, but it has a slight sense of hope to it as well. Now that they destroyed Cyberdyne's systems, it's possible that that future that they wanted, where there's no war, there's no machines taking over the world, there's a sense of hope in Sarah's voice as she gives her voiceover in the ending. Because if a machine, a Terminator, can learn the value of human life, maybe we can too. Those are my thoughts on the first two Terminator films. Both solid sci-fi action classics that are still gonna live on even 100 years from now. People are gonna look back on these movies and be like, wow, those are darn good movies. And as far as the rest of the Terminator films, well, we'll get to those eventually. But with Terminator Dark Fate coming up soon, here's hoping it's a good one. So thanks guys for watching my video. Comment below and tell me what your thoughts are on the first two Terminator films, and I will see you all very soon.